But you are a socialist activist and you are for Leave. How do you answer to all people who say that only the far right is supporting Leave, is supporting UK to leave EU?
Well, I don't think that's true. I don't think it's only the far right. It's obviously true that the racist right has become dominant in the arguments. If you walk into the newspaper, the newsagents, you see the headlines. They're setting the tone of this debate, and that, I think, was always likely to be the case. But the reason that immigration is such an issue that they can capitalise on is because it was talked up by mainstream politicians, by Labour Party politicians, by Conservative Party politicians. Over the past 20 years, you've seen politicians of all different stripes say immigrants are a problem, immigration is a problem. Now, this creates a consensus in which the far right can thrive. And now I deplore all of that, but we have to be clear which is the cart and which is the horse here. And the people driving this are the mainstream parties in Britain, and they are backing Remain. So it's certainly not the case that the Leave campaign is purely and solely about racists. There are far more people supporting Leave in the polls than there are people who are bigoted and racist against immigrants. What is really happening is that there is a popular suspicion of the European Union and a popular suspicion of political elites generally. And in the absence of the left actually making any arguments for why those suspicions are correct, the right is capitalising on it. So someone says, I don't really like the EU, I can't quite put my finger on why I don't like it, and the first argument they reach for is something about migrants, because that's what dominates it, which is what I think that's a bad place to be, but I think it would be a worse place to be if the left does not actually say you're right to be suspicious of the European Union, you're right to be against the European Union. If the left abdicates from that debate and tails the ruling class, bad things will happen and bad things will get worse.
Let's focus now our attention on the socialist case for Leave. What do you expect in case of a victory of Leave?
Well, if Leave wins, in Britain, there will be complete turmoil in the ruling class, in all the major parties, in all the press. It is not something that anybody was expecting. Nobody's prepared for it. I'm not going to say that this will automatically somehow lead to Jeremy Corbyn winning elections and what have you. It will be a difficult situation. It will be a very difficult situation, but it will be one where the people who run this country will be weak and divided. And that's a point where opportunities arise. But I don't think a vote for Britain to leave would really the most important thing that would happen concerns Britain. I think the most important thing in terms of the big picture is it will be a mortal blow to the European Union. The European Union as a political and economic project which is already on the rocks. I mean, you read the Financial Times, the Telegraph, newspapers like that, they will go into detail about how the EU is already in a major crisis. And for the second largest economy in the EU to walk out, that would split apart the alliance of big nations, France, Germany, Britain, Netherlands, that are at the top of the EU.
Holy alliance.
Unholy alliance even, and dictate its direction. It will split them apart. It will massively weaken the EU's political legitimacy. And I think, actually, humanity as a whole will benefit from that, because the EU's existence, throughout its existence, it has policed trade deals that have kept the rich nations rich and the poor nations poor. Within Europe, it keeps the poorer nations like Greece and Spain in massive austerity, and the rich nations less austerity. Even within the rich nations,
it is an oligarchy.
It is an oligarchy that supports the richest in society against the poorest in society. Let's take something like the Common Agricultural Policy, which for many years was just like a massive public subsidy towards the farming business. It used to be paid to farmers, now it is paid to the landowners. So if you look at any particular bit of EU policy, and any particular bit of what it actually does, you will see that it moves money, it exploits the poor and gives money to the rich. That is what it really does. And there's no that I don't think can be reformed away. I don't think we can vote for more left-wing MEPs and that will sort it out. I think there has to be a blow struck against the European Union. Otherwise, this will continue and it will get worse.
The refugee crisis has exposed a weakness of the European Union because if you think about the numbers, about 1 million people entered the EU last year, but the population of the EU is 500 million people. So it's like a family who is coming to settle in a street. But this was enough, this number was enough to put the whole system in crisis, and you have seen countries closing the borders and talking even about new walls in Europe. So it means that the system is fragile.
Yes, and I think, the EU's two major achievements have been the euro and the Schengen Agreement, and both have turned out to be very fragile. And I think, in the long term, this is part of what is driving the panic reactions amongst the European ruling class. It's certainly true that there is no reason why Europe as an entity, or even Britain, can't absorb this wave of refugees. And the question arises, why don't they? I mean, Merkel made initial moves in that direction and then stepped back. But all these countries find themselves very politically boxed in. They've spent the past 20, 30 years saying there's too many migrants. All of these parties have been doing that. And they've created an atmosphere where they can't bring these people in. And secondly, and I think more fundamentally, when ruling class parties, when rich organisations and capitalists open up the borders or close the borders, they're doing that not because they want free movement or they don't like immigrants. They're doing that because they want to manage the flow of migrants. And the reason I think the European ruling class is panicking is because the refugee crisis has shown that it's politically incapable of managing the migration. It's not the numbers that have scared it, it's the fact that it's out of its control. And one of the reasons it's out of its control is that the refugees themselves have organised to try to rip down the walls of Fortress Europe. And I think whatever position we stand on the European debate and referendum in Britain, we have to stand in solidarity with those migrants.